G'day YouTubers, and welcome to the second episode in the East of Stradbroke series. Last episode we left off at Shag Rock, and I did say there are other fishing grounds really close. If you don't find anything there, you can move on really quickly to search other areas, and that's what we're going to do in this episode. We'll cover a couple of them. So to keep the introduction nice and short, let's get straight into it. The closest well-known fishing area to Shag Rock is of course Middle Reef. It's about 1 nautical mile northeast of Shag Rock, and it only takes a minute or two to get there at 20 knots. I'll just take a second to explain the 20 knots business. That's full speed from point to point, but you shouldn't leave a fishing ground at full speed, and you shouldn't arrive at a fishing ground at full speed. It creates too much noise and frightens the fish. When you're leaving, it's out of respect for people that are still there, not to speed off. Just move out slowly until you're a good distance away from the fishing ground. And when you're arriving, you don't want to scare the fish off for yourself, or anyone else that's fishing there. So slow down before you get there and just approach it slowly. That means it might take you 4 or 5 minutes to do that little trip, but it is well worth it. Looking at a navionics map with the contour lines, it looks as though it's fairly clear just what Middle Reef is, where it is, and the drop-offs around it, but it's not quite as simple as that. This next slide is also from navionics and got the bottom shaded in blue. I don't find this the best colour a lot of the time for looking at the bottom in navionics. Sometimes it works, but by and large I find that this isn't the best colour. The next slide is for me. And this is the colour palette that works best for me in this particular area. I can see now that it's not just the area enclosed by the contour lines that you should be interested in. It's an area to the east and northeast as well. In fact, at Middle Reef, I've generally done best when I've been fishing on the northeast side of the reef area. This screenshot shows the areas that I would sound around. It's a huge area. It's even bigger than the area around Shag Rock. Just a quick square measurement around the area is about 740, 750 metres on a side. So that's about 500,000 square metres that you've got to cover if you were to scan the whole lot of it. And that's 50 hectares. It's going to take you a long time to do that with a sonar, so again what I do is I hit the highlights. Where there's a lot of structure, I'll have a good sound around it. Otherwise I'll just try and go around the edges of the drop-offs and the main pieces of structure. There's no point fishing if you can't see fish, but you don't want to spend all day looking for the fish either, so you've got to try and compromise between where you look, how much time you spend there, and moving on to the next spot if you're not finding something. I've got a few marks around the Middle Reef area, and I'll take you through them one at a time, but before I do that I just want to mention that the white line you see in this screenshot is the track that I mentioned earlier from Shag Rock to Middle Reef, and I left that in just to give you an idea of where the end point is in relation to some of these spots. It may not make a lot of difference to you because the end point depends on the start point and the course you follow, but I left it in anyway. But I'm going to start off with this historical one. It's a plane crash from 1947. The plane was a Douglas C-47 Dakota, which was a transport plane used a lot during World War II and just afterwards. It was also used as a commercial airliner, and you'd probably heard of it as a DC-3 in that role. Anyway, the plane belonged to the Royal Netherlands East Indies Air Force, and it had been at Archerfield Airport for repairs or servicing, and it was doing a test flight out over North Stradbroke Island when it caught fire and crashed into the sea. Unfortunately, all 6 people on board were killed. There were 3 Australians and 3 Dutch, and the wreck was located a couple of weeks later. One wing and wheel undercarriage was moved in to a spot just west of Shag Rock. I don't have a location on that, but I would like to get one. And the rest of the wreck, while spotted, was never moved or recovered, so it's still down there somewhere. The mark here is just a general area, because as far as I'm aware, no one has ever actually located the wreck and marked a spot for it. In fact, members of the Air Force Scuba Diving Club are still searching for it to this day. But the story goes that it went down about 25 metres of water somewhere near Middle Reef. so one of you might just get lucky and paint it on the sounder. This next mark is the last spot that I overnighted on Middle Reef. As I recall, it wasn't a particularly pleasant night. It was a lot rougher than I expected, but once I'd settled in for the night and it was dark, I decided to stay there. I did manage to get some sleep. I slept soundly enough that I didn't realise that I had a fish at some point. I don't know how long he was on the line for, because when I got up in the morning the hook had been bitten off, so he may have just come along and bit it straight off. That does happen. There's not much to say about these marks until we get to the last couple, so I'll just let them play through. I'll just mention some of the marks are mine, some of the marks I've gathered from public forums. They're all over structure, so they're all worth a look and have a sound around the general area. The fact that so many are concentrated in one little corner is a good indication that that's one of the best fishing spots on the reef, and the fact that I generally do best on the northeast corner, that's not far from where I fish. A little bit further south, but on the eastern side of the reef anyway. This second last mark is a mark that I got last time I was out in that area. As I recall, there wasn't any structure there to really take note of. It may have been a little bit, but what I did mark was a school of fish down on the bottom. I was on my way somewhere else, so I didn't stop and fish them, but I put the mark in there so that when I go past again I can check and see if there's anything there that's attracting fish regularly or if it was just a chance encounter. I'll give it to you guys. If you're in the area, you might want to do the same thing. And finally, this mark that I've got as Middle Reef North isn't really part of Middle Reef, or not part of what I consider as Middle Reef, but it is some structure off to the north of it. I haven't fished this particular structure, but it's down on my bucket list to have a good look around it. And I'll just superimpose the Navionics map over top of the marks in my application, just so you can get an idea what the bottom's like where each of my marks are. What I didn't mention is if you have a look around Shag Rock first, you've then got to decide where you're going to go to next. I don't always go up to Middle Reef next. It depends a lot on how many boats are already there. I don't like to get a fishing spot that's too crowded, but if you do go up to Middle Reef, then one of the places you can go after that is up towards Flat Rock. Stay outside the green zone, so you'll need a GPS that will tell you before you get to the green zone, however it does that. And just go at a speed where you can read the bottom. Don't go too fast that you can't get a good read on the bottom. And sometimes you'll see something on the bottom up towards that direction that'll make you stop, often enough that it's worth the effort of going up there. It's only a few minutes. There's a mark in this shot that's just outside the green zone. That's where you need to stop. If you haven't found anything by then, no sense going any further, you'll be inside the green zone. If you do decide to go up towards the green zone to see what you can see, you can cut across to another mark that is the north end of a spur that travels from Flat Rock down towards the southeast. If you do that, you'll be cutting across the bottom end of the green zone, so make sure your rods are stowed, because if fisheries sees you going through the green zone with your rods not stowed, you can be fined. So make sure your rods are stowed, cut across to the northern end of that spur, and we'll cover that next. There's a mark here at the northern end of the spur that should keep you outside the green zone, so once you're there you can start your run down towards the south-southeast. Go a bit slow, make sure you can read the bottom. Great if you've got a side scan, otherwise just use your normal sonar and down imaging and see what you can see there. I just want to say about this spur that back in the day when we followed the spur down, I don't think we actually went to the end of it as I've shown here. As I recall, we found fish fairly quickly, so I think we were always inside the green zone when we followed this spur. It's possible we went a little bit outside, but I really don't think we followed it all the way to the end. I've marked it here from the edge of the green zone to the end because, as I say, we used to follow this line to fish. Navionics map shows that the structure extends past the green zone. I haven't looked at this, but I think it's worth a shot. And this is the mark at the bottom of the Spur area. If you get down this far and you haven't found anything, then it's time to go and look elsewhere. Now these marks that I've just put up on that Spur, the two round marks have been taken from the Navionics chart. I'll tell you how I arrived at them. Back in the day, before Flat Rock was the green zone, used to line up up near Flat Rock and come down zigzagging along a course and just using the old traditional 2D sounder, no chirp, no down image, no nothing, and see when you found some fish. Now I put the course in there and I've taken the start and finish marks. The start mark I've put in where it's outside the green zone, but on the line that we used to follow. And the end mark I've put in where Navionics says that the ridge ends. And just while we're on the subject of how we used to fish this area back in the day before we had all the technology we have now, like GPS's, side vision sonar, downscan, all the rest of it, we used to follow this line out as well. Now again, I've extended it a long way past the boundary of the green zone. I think that the area we used to fish in is entirely within the green zone now. But there is an indication in the Navionics and bathymetry maps that the structure does continue on in that direction, albeit not very pronounced. You may want to have a sound around it, but I basically put it here just to illustrate that we could follow two different lines and pretty much be on the same spur and come across fish. But again, what we did back in the day is irrelevant because there is a green zone there now, so make sure you stay outside of that. And still on the same subject of how we used to find things in the old days, before we had all this wonderful electronics, if you line up with the eastern side of Flat Rock and head due south, it will run you into Halfway Reef. That's a little patchy reef, stretches north-south. Now it's worth having a sound along that as well if you're out in that area. Again, not very far from anywhere that we're talking about in this area. Everything's just a few minutes away at 20 knots. A little bit longer if you're respectful of everyone around and don't want to chase the fish. You can go direct from the edge of the green zone we were talking about earlier over to the Halfway Reef, the northern mark on that, and it's less than a nautical mile. If you follow that spur I talked about earlier down from Flat Rock, then once you get to the end of that, or around about the end of that, it's only 600 metres across to the top end of the Halfway Reef. This is another spot I haven't been across since I've had a really good sounder with side imaging and down vision and everything. Back in the day we didn't have GPS. These marks here are on the Navionics chart where it shows the rough bottom, which looks like it'd be the reef. It's about the right distance down from Flat Rock and it's on the north-south line that we used to follow. So I'm pretty sure that these are the marks that we used to go to and fish along. I'm not really sure how the Halfway Reef got its name or what it's halfway between, but I do have some marks here on it. The north and south marks here are for the boundaries of the reef as I see them in the Navionics map and the bathymetry. As I recall, it's a fairly wide area of patchy reef, so you need to zigzag around it a little bit. The central mark on this is from the maps where they generally label Halfway Reef. Just have a look at some of the bottom contours and Navionics for this area to finish off the video. These first couple are from Navionics, and this is one case where you really need to look at the blue colour as well as the other one to figure out exactly what's down there. The rest are from Bathy maps, and again they give a good overview of all the structure that's down there on the bottom, not just the ones I've given marks for so far. And not having a GPS back in the day, the further away from land you got, the less reliable your spot became because there was more margin for error in the increased distance that you were taking your bearings off. But that wasn't a problem because we had the sounders and we got into the area and sounded around to find the fish, rather than these days where a lot of people just have a mark and go to it. It's always been more effective to sound around and find the fish. When I got my first GPS capable sounder, I didn't really take any marks. I still did what we did, got to the area and sounded around. If I did take a mark, it was just a general area mark. It wasn't a specific mark to fish on. And I still do that largely to this day. Once I get to the mark, I sound around and look for the fish. One thing I've always thought about this area is that if you go anywhere within this flashing triangle and just sound around, keep moving around in that area, eventually you're going to find a patch of reef, rough ground or something that will hold fish. I haven't fished this area very much since they made Flat Rock a green zone, so things may have changed, but it used to be a very productive area. One of the really nice things about this area is just how close everything is. If you're not doing any good in one spot, it's only a couple of minutes to move to the next spot. Back in the day, it used to be a really productive area. You could always go out there and catch something. I've only fished it a couple of times since they put the green zone in. Didn't do particularly well on those occasions. There's certainly a lot more boats out in that area now than there ever used to be, so that may have some impact on it. You'd think with the green zone being in this area that the fish that breed in the green zone, which is the whole purpose of having the green zone to preserve fish breeding areas, you'd think those fish would breed there and move out to be caught. And obviously people do go out there and catch quite a few fish, but it's not like it used to be, and I think that's mainly fishing pressure. There's a lot more people out there to catch the fish, so there's fewer fish per person to be caught. But never mind, as we go through this series, there's a lot of places further afield that aren't as well travelled, for want of a better word. Anyway, I'm going to call it quits on this video here. I've still got some things I want to talk about in this general area before we move out of it. I'll do that in the next video. Thank you for watching. I hope you got something out of it. Until next time, good fishing.